The Century of Columbus by James Joseph Walsh. Book 1, Chapter VII. Sculpture and Minor Arts and Crafts Outside of Italy. While Italy excelled in sculpture at this time, as indeed in every department of art, the other countries of Europe practically all enjoyed a magnificent period of development in plastic art, not a little of it thoroughly national in character, and some of the most precious of it quite apart from Italian influence. Besides, there was a marvelous accomplishment in the subsidiary arts and artistic crafts, well deserving of mention, which confirms the place of this period among the greatest of productive eras. A very noteworthy development of sculpture took place in the Netherlands, where in the midst of the rising democracies and the commercial prosperity, there was a great outburst of artistic genius. Wealthy patrons had the good taste to recognize artistic genius and encourage it. There has never been a period or country when tradesmen proved more discriminatingly beneficent. It would be indeed surprising if the country that produced the Van Eycks and the first great evolution of oil painting with the work of Van der Weyden, Memling, Quentin Matsys, Gerard David, and so many others on canvas should not have given us sculpture worthy of this fine artistic development. We do not, as a rule, know the names of the individual sculptors in the Netherlands, because apparently they looked upon themselves as artisans, whose duty it was to do their work faithfully and thoroughly, looking for no reward or fame and no special recognition beyond their own consciousness of having done good work. Their sculptures are to be seen in many places, in the cathedrals, the town halls, and the other beautiful buildings erected at this time. Louvain, Brussels, and many of the other towns of what is now Belgium, particularly must have had many artistic workers in stone who well deserve the name of sculptors. They executed not only beautifully decorative work, but also full-length statues, busts, medallions in high and low relief, and plastic ornaments of all kinds. The high quality of their accomplishment can scarcely be disputed, and yet the lack of their names has often left the impression that there were no great sculptors at this time. The fine sculpture that has come down to us is, however, an emphatic contradiction of any such notion. Some of the work done in the humble medium of wood is particularly interesting. The charmingly artistic wood carving of the consecration of Saint Eloi in the church of Notre Dame at Bruges is a striking example. The choir seats of the church at Louvain are quite as worthy of high praise, and the wood carvings in the choir at Haarlem, so often admired, come from this same period. Perhaps one of the best examples of the wood carving of the time is the pulpit of the cathedral at Leyden, which was made in this century. The tombs of Mary of Burgundy and of Charles the Bold in the church of Notre Dame, Bruges, still further emphasize the sculptural capacity of these generations, though from the rarity of large masterpieces, there were apparently but few opportunities to dispel it on a monumental scale. These monuments, especially the older one, are supremely great works of art. A comparison of them is very illuminating for the history of sculpture in our period. Though constructed scarcely half a century apart, they are executed under the influence of the two typical but very different art impulses of this century. The tomb of Mary, made by Peter Becker of Brussels in 1502, is medieval and Gothic in spirit. That of Charles, made by order of Philip II just before 1560, is a distinctly Renaissance work. The later is much more modern and obvious in the meaning of all its symbolism, but one need not be an artist to see how much more genuinely artistic is the earlier tomb. At first glance, one seems almost a replica of the other, except, of course, for the figure of the deceased and the subjects of the decorations of the sarcophaguses. But it takes but little study to discover what a descent there is in the art quality of the Renaissance work. Nowhere can one see the value of the old and the new, nor compare Gothic and Renaissance so easily as here. Sculpture developed very wonderfully in Germany during the first half of Columbus's century. The commercial prosperity of the time, the development of industries, and the increase of trade caused an inflow of wealth into many of the cities of southern Germany particularly, and not a little of this wealth found its way through the generosity of donors into the decoration of their churches. The people's faith was deep and full. Reform had not yet come to disturb it. Germany devoted itself especially to sculptured decoration in wood. An immense number of carved altars, pulpits, choir screens, stalls, tabernacles, and other church fittings of very great elaborateness and usually fine artistic quality were produced. One of the first of the great German woodcarvers was Georg Zerlin, who executed the famous choir stalls of Cathedral, so richly decorated and ornamented with statuettes and canopies. His son of the same name did the great pulpit in the same cathedral and was given the commission for the elaborate stalls in Blaubeuren Church. These were finished within a year of the discovery of America. At Nuremberg, wood carving also reached a high degree of excellence, and Veit Stoss of Nuremberg, though notorious for his escapades, was looked upon as the most skillful of artists for church woodwork. He was invited to Krakow to do the high altar, the tabernacle, and the stalls of the Frauenkirchen. His masterpiece is the great wooden panel nearly 6 feet square, carved toward the end of the 15th century, with an immense number of scenes from Bible history, which is now among the treasures of the Nuremberg Town Hall. Albrecht Dürer himself, with Renaissance versatility, took up sculpture and did not despise even the humble medium of wood. He was a clever woodcarver and executed a tabernacle with an exquisitely carved relief of Christ on the cross between his mother and St. John, which still may be seen in the chapel of the monastery at Landau. The British Museum possesses a number of miniature reliefs in boxwood, which were also made by Dürer, though he early abandoned wood carving for artwork in materials that might be expected to be more enduring. The influence of the wood carving of this period can be noted in the work of the sculptors of the time, even after they abandoned it for stone and bronze. Adam Kraft's great Schreier monument in St. Sebald's church at Nuremberg, for instance, shows very clearly the influence of wood carving. There is no doubt, however, about his high place among the sculptors, even of this glorious period in the art. The Vischer family, for 3 generations, executed a series of very great monuments in bronze, especially during the second half of Columbus's century. The genius of the family was Peter Vischer, of the second generation, who was admitted as a master sculptor into the Sculptors' Guild of Nuremberg in 1489. Perhaps the most interesting thing about his work is his absolute mastery of the technique of this art. Few men have ever succeeded in casting in bronze to such good effect. After having finished the magnificent tomb of Archbishop Ernest of Magdeburg Cathedral, in which some traces of Gothic influence still linger, Vischer obtained the opportunity for his masterpiece in the beautiful canopy for the shrine of St. Sebald at Nuremberg, a veritable triumph of plastic art. Modern critical appreciation of it has very well corroborated contemporary admiration. Its details are a never-ending source of interest and study. Some of the statuettes of saints attached to the slender columns of the canopy are among the most charming examples of their kind that we have. They have grace and dignity, as well as great expressiveness. Near the base there is a small, evidently portrait, figure of a rather stout, bearded man wearing a large leathern apron, holding some of the sculptor's tools with which he usually worked, that is considered to be a figure of Peter himself. It is a marvel of clever realism. The story of the execution of this monumental masterpiece is of itself a lesson in the artwork of the time. Peter was assisted by his sons, and they worked at it almost continuously for more than 10 years, between 1508 and 1519. It was often extremely difficult for them to secure enough money for their work from the authorities who had agreed to pay, though stingily enough. Yet they devoted themselves to it as wholeheartedly as if it was a munificently rewarded work. The smaller figures are executed with marvelous attention to detail, and every feature of the work, the graceful scroll foliage so abundantly used, the dragons and even the grotesques, all the details which crowd every possible part of the canopy, were executed evidently without the slightest regard for the time and labor which were required for them, and with the good workman's delight in his work. It has sometimes been said that these Teutonic sculptors of Nuremberg were mere workers in bronze who reproduced in that material the ideas and drawings of others. As pointed out by Cecil Headlam in his little book on the Bronze Founders of Nuremberg, the evidence of our eyes, which enable us to trace the development of their style, would be enough to refute that opinion, even if we were without the documentary evidence which shows that father and sons alike were patient and painstaking draftsmen as well as craftsmen all their lives. There is no doubt at all that they adopted and adapted many ideas from the great Italian sculptors of their own and the preceding time. They were deeply influenced by Sansovino, Donatello, Leonardo da Vinci. But they were not mere imitators, and they were not plagiarists in any sense of the word. To quote Mr. Headlam again, they could apply the lessons they had learnt from their careful study of the Italian masters, and apply them with successful originality. It is in the energy which lives in the King Arthur, the simple yet vigorous composition and execution of bas-reliefs, such as the healing of the blind man of St. Sebald's tomb, or the Teucer memorial, and with their wholly admirable treatment of lines and planes, it is in the tender and spiritual feeling infused into the greatest of their bronze portraits that the unanswerable vindication lies of an imitation proved not too slavish, and of a study that has not deadened but inspired. Other cities in southern Germany, as Augsburg and Innsbruck, and at least one city in northern Germany, Lübeck, are in possession of bronze sculptures which show how thoroughly alive was the spirit of plastic art all over Germany at this time. Innsbruck possesses a series of bronze statues, all of them executed in the first half of the 16th century, which has always attracted the attention of the world artists ever since. There are 28 colossal bronze figures around the tomb of the Emperor Maximilian, which stands in the center of the nave of the cathedral. They are designed to represent the heroes of the olden time, and one of them, usually looked upon as the finest, is an ideal statue of King Arthur of the Britain legends, famous for the nobility of the face and pose. He is represented in the plate armor of the early 15th century. The statue of Theodoric is also considered to be not only a very fine example of the work of the period, but also one of the world's great bronze statues. The difficulties encountered in the accomplishment of the casting of the bronze for these were so great that the emperor invited Peter Vischer from Nuremberg to superintend at least this portion of the work, and it is probable that his influence was felt also on the modeling. The designs are usually attributed to local artists at Innsbruck, however, of whose names we are not sure. In nothing are these older periods so different from ours, as in the utter neglect of artists to make any effort to secure their personal fame. In France, even before the time of the Renaissance, or at least before the effect of Greek ideas was felt, there was a magnificent development of sculpture, an inheritance from the older period of the 13th and early 14th centuries, which had left such magnificent monuments as the tombs in Saint-Denis, Le Beau Dieu at Amiens, and the statues in the porch of the cathedral at Chartres. The first of these French Gothic sculptors of Columbus's century is Colombe, trained in Flanders, who founded a school of sculpture at Tours. He executed the tomb of Margaret of Austria and her husband Duke Philibert of Savoy in the marble church of Brou. Tours became a great center of art in the latter half of the 15th century. Its name, the town of spires, indicates that there had always been aspirations after effect in their ecclesiastical architecture, and this reached a culmination in statuary at this time. With Colombe, his nephews worked while Juste and his son collaborated in the poetic tomb built in honor of the son and daughters of Charles VIII in the Cathedral of Tours. Here also they erected the famous tomb of Louis XII and Anne of Bretagne, which has since been carried to Saint-Denis. The Juste had a power of putting touching human qualities into marble that has always given a special interest to their work. Jean Fouché probably made at this time the lovely tomb of Agnes Sorel at Loches, which has been so famous and has helped to make Loches a favorite pilgrimage place ever since. French sculpture touched by the Renaissance reached a further triumph of artistic development in the first half of the 16th century. Two names particularly stand out, those of Goujon and Germain Pilon. Though the first signs of that affectation and mannerism which developed as the Renaissance progressed are to be already noted in their styles, they combined great technical skill with refinement in modeling. Undoubtedly the greatest of the French sculptors of the time was Jean Goujon, whose most pleasing work is the marble group of Diana reclining beside a stag, which exhibits a power beyond that of any except the greatest Italian sculptors. He executed a series of sculptures for the older part of the Louvre, which beautifully harmonizes with the architecture. His reliefs for the Fountain of the Innocents are one of the best known of his works and have a charm all their own. The other great sculptor, Germain Pilon, trained under the influence of the Renaissance, did his best work just after the close of Columbus's century. His group of the Three Graces, bearing on their heads an urn containing the heart of Henry II, executed for Catherine de' Medici, has been deservedly very much praised. Other men, Maître Ponce and Barthélemy Prieur, did work that has attracted much attention about this same time. A fine portrait effigy of a recumbent figure in full armor of the Duke of Montmorency, which has always attracted the attention of those of critical artistic taste and is one of the treasures of the Louvre, is the work of Prieur. The story of subsequent decadence is as striking in France as in other countries. No sculpture of any significance appeared during the 17th century, though some of the artists of the time exhibited great technical skill. Indeed, it was not until the coming of Goujon at the end of the 18th and the beginning of the 19th century that there is any relief from the story of mediocrity or worse, and in his time the plastic arts had reached a very low ebb. Modern French sculpture is the result of the movement begun by Goujon, but it is separated from the Renaissance by nearly 2 centuries of debasement. A very interesting and valuable development of the arts and crafts that came in the Netherlands at this time was in the execution of art tapestries. This is the period when weaving of all kinds came to its highest perfection all over the world. The 15th and 16th century Oriental rugs command the highest prices and are among the most beautiful examples of carpet weaving that we have. In the Netherlands and in France, tapestry reached its highest perfection, and the examples executed at this time are now the precious treasures of governmental museums and similar public institutions almost without exception, and probably will not change hands again, because they are looked upon as too valuable for educational purposes and the uplifting of popular taste for public authorities ever to part with them. In the Netherlands particularly, tapestry making reached a climax of perfection. After Michelangelo had been asked to decorate the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, Raphael was requested to do a series of cartoons for the tapestries to be hung around the walls of it, which were to be executed in Flanders. After their completion, they were the admiration of Rome, and we have many expressions of praise for them from the great men of the time, whose critical ability in all matters relating to art cannot be doubted. Vasari has an enthusiastic tribute, which, even discounting his well-known tendency to praise overmuch under certain circumstances, still serves to show how thoroughly satisfied this period of great art was with these masterpieces. He said, quote, "One is astonished at the sight of this series. The execution is marvelous. One can hardly imagine how it was possible with simple threads to procure such delicacy in the hair and beards and to express the suppleness of flesh. It is a work more godlike than human. The waters, the animals, and the habitations are so perfectly represented that they appear painted with the brush, not woven." End quote. The tapestries were first shown the day after Christmas, 1519, in the Sistine Chapel, for which they had been designed. Some of the greatest of the Renaissance scholars and artists and literary men were present on that occasion. It was the custom at that time to send as ambassadors to Rome from foreign countries distinguished scholars and amateurs. Many of these were present. All were enthusiastic in their admiration. Rumor said that they were quite unable to express all that they felt for these new works of art. Everyone present, one of the guests said in a letter to his sovereign, was speechless at the sight of these hangings, and it is the unanimous opinion that nothing more beautiful exists in the universe. Another of those present wrote, quote, "After the Christmas celebrations were over, the Pope exposed in his chapel 7 tapestries, the 8th not being finished, executed in the West, that is, Flanders. They were considered by everyone the most beautiful specimens of the weaver's art ever executed, and this in spite of the celebrity attained by other tapestries, those in the antechamber of Pope Julius II, those made for the Marchese of Mantua after the cartoons of Mantegna, and those made for the King of Naples. They were designed by Raphael of Urbino, an excellent painter, who received from the Pope 100 ducats for each cartoon. They contain much gold, silver, and silk, and the weaving cost 1,500 ducats apiece, a total of 16,000 ducats for the set, as the Pope himself says, though rumor would put the cost at 20,000 golden ducats." End quote. Even this account gives evidence that it was not because of their rarity, but on account of their unique quality, that the Sistine tapestries were so much admired. As a matter of fact, most of the ruling court families of Italy ordered tapestries for themselves that have since become famous, and most of these were made in France and in the Netherlands. There is absolutely no doubt left now that this is the period when the best tapestries ever made were woven. George Leland Hunter, in his Tapestries, Their Origin, History, and Renaissance, says that the golden age of tapestries was the Gothic Renaissance transition, the last half of the 15th century and the first half of the 16th century, the 100 years during which Renaissance tapestries began and Gothic tapestries ceased to be woven, while many of the greatest tapestries were of mixed style, like the Story of the Virgin at Reims. There are sets woven at various times during this period which are among the greatest tapestry treasures of the world. The largest of all these sets is the Story of Saint-Remy in the church of the same name at Reims, 16 feet high with a combined width of 165 feet. When exhibited at the Paris exhibition in 1900, one of them, wrong side out in order to display the richness and solidity of the ancient unfaded colors, attracted the attention of amateurs all over the world. The Story of Saint-Étienne in 9 pieces at the Cluny Museum at Paris was presented to the Cathedral of Auxerre in 1502. As a matter of fact, there was scarcely a cathedral or monastery in France at this time that did not come into the possession of beautiful tapestries that are now very precious treasures. During recent years, the value of such tapestries has increased very much, and our millionaires have been willing to spend almost fabulous sums in order to get possession of them. We have had the opportunity here in America, through the munificence of the late Mr. Pierpont Morgan, to see some of them in the Metropolitan Museum, and have learned to realize that the praise of them is well deserved. Mr. Hunter says that, quote, "The most famous tapestries in the world are the Renaissance tapestries, though the only distinction in most cases between the Gothic tapestries of the end of the 15th and the Renaissance tapestries at the beginning of the 16th is that in one, whatever architecture or ornamentation or decoration is used has Gothic motives, while the models for these same details in the later tapestries is drawn from the Renaissance." End quote. The Brussels tapestries of the early 16th century are particularly beautiful and are the despair of the modern tapestry makers. Other Flemish cities, however, Arras, Tournai, Bruges, Lille, Antwerp, became famous for their tapestries, and Delft in Holland was a worthy rival. The art seems to require too much patience for our modern artisans to compete with their brethren of the old time. But doubtless, with the rise and appreciation of artistic handicraftsmanship, and the demand for charming decoration of homes and public buildings regardless of cost, we may look confidently for a development even in this line. The other phases of the arts and crafts also developed very wonderfully outside of Italy, as well as in the peninsula. Beautiful vessels for altar use, chalices, candlesticks, crucifixes, and the like were made, and indeed this is the supreme period of their manufacture. Some of the chalices of this time were made by distinguished sculptors who felt that they could not devote themselves to more suitable artwork than this for church purposes. Under the inspiration of deep religious feeling, some even of the smaller pieces are among the world's great works of art. Benvenuto Cellino made morses, which is a type of decorative clasp, chalices, and crucifixes that are famous. Many of these were executed for patrons outside of Italy. His well-known crucifix in the Escurial near Madrid, made for Philip II, is a typical example. Processional crosses lent themselves to decorative effect very well, and some of them from this time are indeed very beautiful works of art. The same application of artistic craftsmanship was to be noted with regard to nearly everything meant for the service of the church or for use in municipal building for the decoration of municipal property. The well-known iron well railing, executed, it is said, by Quentin Matsys, when the artist was but a blacksmith and had not yet taken up painting, is a typical example of the combination of the beautiful and useful which characterizes so much of the work of this time and carries away every point of admiration. There was scarcely any form of decorative work that did not receive high artistic development at this time nearly everywhere throughout Europe. In recent years, enamels have attracted much attention, and the recent presentation of the Barwell collection to the British Museum brought the Limoges work into prominence again. The London Illustrated News reproduced a series of Limoges enamels in the Barwell collection that are marvelous in color and artistic excellence. The Courtois, the younger of whom, Jean, died in 1586, are probably the greatest artistic craftsmen in this mode. Pierre Courtois, or Courtet, made just about the end of our century the largest enamels which ever came out of Limoges, with life-size figures of the virtues. Pierre Raymond, who was the mayor of Limoges in 1567, did some work that attracted attention as early as 1532. The stream of artistic influence at this time can be studied very well in his work, for he was influenced by the Germans in his early maturity, later came under the influence of the Italian school, though he had been a pupil of Nardon-Péquinot, who himself came of a famous French family of 15th and 16th century artists, whose work always possesses distinction. Some of the plaques and salvers of this time in enamel are among the most precious treasures of national collections throughout the world. Some of the locks and keys and latches and hinges for doors made during this period are among the most beautiful examples of ironwork in the world. The Cluny Museum in Paris possesses a number of these, as well as other ironwork of Columbus's century, which show that the men of this time had the true artistic spirit in their work. The armorers of the period made probably the most beautiful armor that has ever been made, and the finest pieces in collections, especially in national armories, are nearly all from this time. Scent boxes and jewel boxes of various kinds in the precious or semi-precious metals were always executed with fine artistic taste, or at least some of the best examples of these in the world come from this time. Clocks were made with a perfection of mechanism and at the same time an ornateness that give them a place in the art world instead of merely in the industrial domain. The furniture of the time is noted for its artistic quality, and some of the smaller pieces made by well-known sculptors or under their direction were works of art that now are thought of as world treasures for all time. End of Book 1, Chapter 7, Sculpture and Minor Arts and Crafts Outside of Italy. From the Century of Columbus, by James Joseph Walsh.